Professionals have grappled with what it is to be adopted and trying to describe the adoptee. And two British therapists came up with the term genealogical bewilderment. And that means that they noticed in their patients, their adopted patients, a kind of confusion and not understanding who they were. And they felt it was because they didn't know their genealogy. They talked about adoption stress. They noticed these kids were stressed out, even in a different way from their ordinary child patients. Another professional called it, they have no biological expectation. That means they had no model. They had no one that they could follow, that they could understand what their musical talent came from or what their artist ability came from. And a friend of mine who's a psychologist, when he learned that the records are sealed, which he hadn't known, said, "Oh my God, adoptees have fallen out of the cradle of history." Deep inside of that person is like a lost Atlantis, something that may surface someday. When we have reunion, we have regression, and that means that the mother or the father has regressed back to that sexy, vital person, attractive person they were, and the adoptee has regressed back to a baby, but the adoptee baby is in adult form. So there they are, holding hands and holding each other in ways that a mother would do with her baby, but not the way that two adults are supposed to be doing. I had one birth father call me up. He called me up from out west and he said, "Can you help me? My daughter has gotten in touch with me and wants to meet me, and I want to meet her, but my wife says that if I go to meet her, she'll leave me." So I said, "Well, let me talk to your wife in another session." So the wife gets on the phone and she says, "I wouldn't have minded if his child, his birth child, had been a boy, but it's a girl, a woman, and I don't want my husband to have a relationship with another woman, even though it's his daughter." And this woman was wise in a certain way, because we're finding in some situations that this attraction that mother has with baby and adult baby, can cross over, because there is a need to touch skin and hold the person that has your blood, and it crosses over sometimes into what we call genetic sexual attraction, which there was a workshop the first day here, and which some of you may know about, and I won't go into any further, but it is a danger, and we warn our adoptees when they're going into reunion to be aware of it, why you're so attracted, why you want to touch and hold, and to back up. Some spouses, like my spouse, are very understanding about reunion and about living with an adoptee. He's a psychiatrist, and he's written books on some of the most horrible things that have happened in our lifetime. The atomic bomb, Nazi doctors, Vietnam. But he also, as his form of relief, does cartoons. And he's done 2 cartoon books. They're always birds. He can't draw. Anyway, he has professionally published one book is called Psycho Birds, and another one's called Birds. But he put together over the years a number of cartoons on adoptees, which I decided to self-publish in a book at the Copy Center. And it's called Adoptees and How They Grew. And I'm just going to read you 1 or 2. One bird says to the other, and these are to illustrate how a spouse is trying to understand what it means to be adopted. One bird says to the other, "Other babies are just born, but you were carefully chosen." And the little bird says, "I'd rather be born." And one bird says to the other, "Are you once born or twice born?" And the other one says, "I wasn't born at all." The big bird says, "Are you part of the human condition?" And the adopted bird says, "Only when convenient." Or one bird says, the little bird says to the expert, "Do adoptees attach?" There's a lot of talk about attachment today. Do adoptees attach? And the big bird says, "No, they cling." And I think it's very important for us to keep our sense of humor, because this stuff is so heavy and so sticky. We try to get rid of it all of our lives. And they tell us it's a lifelong process, and we think, oh my God, So we have to keep some sense of humor. All right, now, especially in this section that I'm coming to now, the found part. Adoptees think that when they find or are found, that they're going to be whole, and that they're going to have, and they're going to be different. It's great expectations. And I remember once, years ago, reading a book by a British psychiatrist called R.D. Laing. It was a book called The Divided Self. And this is a brilliant book, which I recommend. And he's also deceased now, but at that time, I remember being very annoyed by what he wrote, and it was that some of his adopted patients thought that when they found their birth family, they would know who they were. Now that upset me. I thought, how can he say that? Of course we'll know who we are. He doesn't understand. He doesn't get it. But over the years, I began to realize that when you find or have been found, you can feel more lost and more bewildered and more threatened than you were before. Because, for many reasons, which we can go over, but you've lost your mythic self, become mortal. And a mortal not only is born, but can die. And you've lost your adopted self. So for a while, it's like you're between two selves, and you don't have a self at all. My husband, who, as you know by now, is a wag, said, well, while you're updating Lost and Found, why don't you change the title, too? Change it to Lost and Found and Lost Again. Now, that's very funny, and we laughed, too, at the time. But afterwards, I thought, what does that mean? And so I had to stop and think about what it meant. And I'm still thinking about it, but here's where I am now. It means that we're between these two selves. You've got the adopted self on one side, and you've got the alternate self on the other side. And when the adoptee goes in search of the birth mother, the original mother, they find not only the mother, but their original self, which had stayed with the birth mother while they went off and got adopted and lived an adopted life. So when they have reunion, they want to jettison this adopted self and go and live the alternate self, live the life that the baby would have lived if the birth mother had kept him. And the birth mother has a life now. Sometimes she's not married, or sometimes she's divorced. Sometimes she has other children, sometimes she doesn't. But there she is, and looking pretty good. Whereas he imagines, or she imagines, that that's what the birth mother looked like back then, 20 or 30 years ago. But a lot of the adoptee's energy is spent with that alternate self. And the adopted self at least has some substance. The adopted self has a room and a television and a cell phone and an iPhone and all the things that adoptees have today, or old people have today. The ghost self, the alternate self, hasn't lived, and so is a kind of wispy, shadowy thing that's hard to hold on to. But the adoptee, for a while, tries to live as if he's always been in the birth mother's family, and live what might have been if the birth mother had kept him. And then sometimes it's a feeling of going back and forth between these two selves. It's almost like being in two theater productions at the same time. One is playing on one side of the street and one on the other side. So sometimes you are saying your lines in the adopted life, then you run across the street and you join the ghost play. But the trouble is that there's no script for that. You've got a script in your adopted life because you've been writing it the whole time. But you've been written out of the ghost script, the birth mother script. And so you have to come in and you have to improvise. She has to improvise. Her kids have to improvise. And it's a very hairy time. It's both exhilarating and frightening. And the adoptee is always with what if. That's something that every adoptee spends a lot of time on. What if she had kept me? What if she had married my birth father? What if I had grown up and been in this family the whole time? So there's a lot of sadness because even if you have a wonderful reunion, you know that you can't make up for that lost time. You have each other, but you don't have what you've lost is the time. But it's this whole period, you're between these two selves. It's like you're in the street between the adoption theater and the birth theater, and almost like there's a lot of traffic and you're going to get run over. I just added the traffic now. And you can feel pulled apart because adoptees have a loyalty to the adoptive parents, because no matter what your relationship with them, they took you when you were falling. When an adoptee is surrendered for adoption, relinquished, whatever word you want to use, I have an image of them falling through the sky, falling through the universe, and then being caught by the adoptive parents. And this falling is in adoptive parents, is in adoptees, and this loyalty to adoptive parents for that reason. And so it's very scary during this period to think you might lose this adopted self. You could even lose your adoptive parents. You could lose everything you've known, your whole lived experience. It's going to take a long time to put together these two selves, this alternate self and this adopted self, so that they can come together and be integrated and become one person. One of the reasons that you need the birth mother and you need the search is that you want to be authentically born. It's as if only she can give real birth to you. And if she keeps you a secret from the rest of her family, and this is a scenario that I've come across a lot in adoptees, they meet the birth mother, and she's willing to meet them and everything, but she doesn't want to tell her other kids. And this is very upsetting. And you can say to an adoptee, okay, so she doesn't tell her other kids and tell her husband, but you can still meet her on the side and have a relationship. And the adoptee is panicked. They say, no, I don't want any more secrets. And I think that one of the reasons for this is that if she won't acknowledge you, it's like you can't be born. It's like you're stuck in the birth canal and you can't get out. It's as if you don't exist. So the adoptee is adamant that this is not going to happen, no more secrets, and some of them then notify the rest of the family, the birth mother's family, and either by emails or by phone calls or by letters. And they think that's going to fix everything, but it really doesn't, because the birth mother disappears on them, and the other relatives usually are loyal to the birth mother, and that ends that relationship completely. Okay. To get back to my title, Lost and Found, and my husband's title, Lost and Found, and Lost Again, I'm going to add another title, Lost and Found, and Lost Again, and Found Again. So I like that. And then I have to ask, like I've been asking all the time, what does it mean? Well, it means that this time, instead of just finding your birth mother, you're going to find yourself. And you're going to integrate yourself, these two parts of the self that I talked about. And you're going to give birth to yourself. You're not going to be dependent on her to give birth to you. And each adoptee does this in his or her own way. And you're going to accept, and this is the hardest thing adoptees have to do, to accept what happened. You're going to accept that you're not going to get the whole story, because you go around asking stories of everybody, asking parts of it. Everybody gives you some different piece of that story, and it doesn't quite hold together. But you're going to accept that, and you're going to accept that some pieces are missing. And you're going to take responsibility for your own life, and that's pretty hard, because I didn't read my husband's cartoon. One of them said, he was asked a lot of questions, says, why is this happening to you and all this? And says, well, because I'm adopted. It's the perfect excuse, because I'm adopted. So you're no longer, as a result of having done all these things, going to be stuck in the identity quagmire. So my new title for my next book then would be, it would not have lost in it at all. The title would just be Found. So that all sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So some of you are going to say, well, how do you do it? And some others will say, it's too hard. So I'm going to, because I want to leave you with how to do it, I'm going to give you the wisdom of a shaman that I read about in a book by Daniel Pinkwater. He's a humorist, in case you don't know who Daniel Pinkwater is. And his new children's book is called Egacy, which is a pun on the Odyssey. And the subtitle of it is, how Iggy wondered what happened to all the ghosts, found out where they went, and went there. So the book is the journey of these children going out to find the lost ghost that lived in a hotel where they lived. The children said, "We don't want this journey to be hard. We want this journey to be easy. We don't want to suffer on this journey." And the shaman said to them, "Any journey worth taking is going to be hard. And this one particularly, and if you want it to have any meaning, then you should just accept the fact that it's hard. Okay?" And the children said, "No, okay, not okay. We don't want to suffer. We want an easy way." So the shaman told them how to do it. And I'm telling you adoptees and how to do it because it might help. And the answer is, if you don't want to suffer on your journey, turn your pockets inside out and dance around wildly. Do you want me to repeat that in case you're taking notes? Turn your pockets inside out and dance around wildly. I didn't talk about the birth mothers in this workshop because I wanted to concentrate on the adoptees, but the birth mothers have their ghosts. On one side is the ghost of the child they gave up, who's always with them, and the ghost of the father of that child, who they might have loved and who is always with them, and the ghosts of the adoptive parents who are raising their child. And yes, they do have this. I've noticed many birth mothers who become head of the Sisters League in the church and become model people because inside they still feel like a fallen woman. Adoptee idealizes the birth mother, so too does the birth mother idealize the adoptive family in a way because they think that is their child has gone to this wonderful family. I had a birth mother tell me once that she was so shocked when she found her son. She'd imagined that he had gone to college and that he had gone to graduate school and that he had taken up a profession and that he was a very successful man. And she found a guy in sneakers and sweatpants who had not been to college and who was not educated in any way that she respected. And it was so horrifying for her that she said, "I had always carried him in my heart, and now I've decided to give him up, to let him go, and I'm going to give him to God. And God will take my burden from me." And this, I thought, it's really dramatic and really frightening, but I think it says what you're talking about. I think the birth mother has the responsibility to accept her child for whatever that child is, because she has a fantasy of that she would have had the perfect child if she'd raised the child. It's like the adoptive parents. If they had had the child, they would have had the perfect child. But that child, let's say that she hadn't given the child up, that child could have been just almost the same as he was when she found him. And it doesn't mean that he would have been perfect. And she has to accept him for what he is, because that, in the same way I say that adoptees have to accept, that's one of my mantras, adoptees must accept what happened. The birth mother has to also accept the child that she found. That's what love is. And that's what unconditional love is. One of the problems for the birth parents when the adoptee comes back is that they, I'm talking about this regression. Everybody regresses. They regress back to their pain and to that difficult time. And the adoptee, I sometimes describe the adoptee as like a terrier digging in the garden and can't stop digging because they can't. That's the place where they left the birth parent and reunite with the birth parent is like the navel of the world. It's a very primal place, and the adoptee wants to stay there. And the birth parents don't want to stay there. And I remember one set of birth parents told my adoptee client, or wrote to him, "We are tired of you going on about what happened. We want to go forward and just leave the past alone and go forward, or we can't go forward with you in a relationship because you keep asking us about our pain and we don't want to go back there and visit it or talk to you about it." And these were very loving birth parents. They were married, and they really had had some wonderful times with the adoptee, but the adoptee still felt as more things he had to know, more digging he had to do, and the birth parents couldn't tolerate it. And I think the birth parents have to learn to tolerate what the adopted baby has to do because it's part of what an abandoned adult baby does and feels. And the birth parent can't abandon that baby again. They have to go with the child. And the adoptive parents have put up with a lot in raising the adoptee. And in some way, the birth parents may have to go through a lot also in raising the adoptee. And the adoptive parents usually, not always, because adoptive parents aren't perfect any more than anybody else, but they usually have stuck with the adoptee and not abandoned the adoptee. And the birth mother or birth father is abandoning the adoptee again if they can't stay with him or her while he's trying to work out this difficult time between the two selves. Adoptive mothers always had the problem of competing with the ghost of the birth mother. But when the adoptive mother dies, she becomes more powerful to the adoptee than when she was alive. And this issue of loyalty, it's some way you've met your birth mother, but you're feeling disloyal to the adoptive mother. And this idealized ghost mother, which I described as growing up with the adoptee, when you meet the birth mother, no matter how wonderful she is, she cannot be as wonderful as that idealized ghost mother. And so the adoptee can feel very disappointed and angry at her. But in that sense, too, the adoptee has to learn to accept who the birth mother is. I remember one adoptee telling me that when they found their adoptive mother was dying, and the adoptive mother said, "The one thing I'm thankful for is that you're not going to be alone, and you've got another mother that you can be with." I'm going to tell you another doll story. And this is one of the saddest stories I've ever heard. I lived in Japan for many years, so I am very sympathetic to Japanese culture and Japanese people. This is about a Japanese birth mother during the war who had an affair with an American soldier who left, as many of them did, after she was pregnant. And she gave the child up for adoption to an American couple. And after that, she went out and she got a life-size doll. I think the lover, the American lover, had been a blonde with blue eyes. She got a doll, or she had it made, and it was about that high, let's say 3 feet high. And it had blonde hair and blue eyes, a little girl, and she carried that doll with her everywhere she went. You know, like sometimes you see people who always carry their little dogs with them. She carried that doll. And it must have been very bizarre because the Japanese always disapproved of blue eyes, and yellow hair. You had to look exactly like them, and there she is carrying this child. And she died when she was probably in her 40s, and she left instructions to be buried with that doll. And the sequel to the story is that after she died, they discovered that her will left the little that she had to the daughter that she had relinquished. And so the agency then had to get in touch with the American family to tell the daughter that. The daughter was probably then in her 30s and had 2 children of her own. And so she flew to Japan and went to her mother's heard the story, went to her mother's grave, and reconnected in that way. How far you go along, there's always another bit of distance to go. And this is what makes adoption so difficult, but it also makes it so fascinating, because it is really an incredibly fascinating, rich experience. So I want to thank all of you for coming today. Thank you.